Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on M&A Training Essentials for Acquiring Companies. My name is Sheila Mayfield, and I'm the Operations Director at Global PMI Partners. And I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping guidelines before we start this webinar. We are recording the webinar, so after this session, we'll go ahead and send a video to you all. We'll have a question and answer period at the close of the presentation. You can use the chat box to submit questions instead of the Q&A box. Now, in the chat box, you're going to see some options. The default option is everyone, and so if you select everyone on this call will see your name and your question. If you're okay with that, go ahead and use that. If you'd rather keep it private, you can use the drop-down menu to select panelists, and that way, that'll just come to us, and you won't be broadcasting your question to everyone. If you prefer to not use that, you can also email questions during the webinar to ops@gpmip.com. And as I said before, a video of the webinar and the presentation will be posted on gpmip.com at the close of the webinar, and everyone on this call will receive a link via email after the webinar. So with that, the webinar will now begin.
Great, thank you, Sheila. Good morning, everyone. This is Scott Whitaker. I'm the Atlanta-based partner with Global PMI Partners. We're a consultancy exclusively focused on post-merger integration and a range of services across the M&A lifecycle. I've been involved in about over 30 transactions across a wide variety of industries and deal sizes. Have worked in several regions of the world. Have also done training, although most of the time I'm doing delivery in the field. Specializing in helping companies plan and manage integrations, primarily driving the IMO, what we call the Integration Management Office, and doing all the planning and execution work involved with that office. Also been fortunate enough to write some books with Wiley. The first one is a book on mergers and integrations, or integration handbook. And the second one leveraged the experience of my fellow partners across the globe, the cross-border mergers and acquisitions, which just came out in April. I'm really glad that you're attending this morning, and hope to share a little bit on my perceptions and experience with training, and for you that might need to evaluate it as a solution for something that you're doing, giving you a little bit of information on how best to do that and some criteria to use. So what we're going to do quickly, and I'm going to make sure to leave some time for Q&A at the end, so we don't shortchange anybody on some important questions that they might have, is go through a little bit on the integration challenge, objectives for integration training, the types, the most common types, criteria that you might employ for selecting training programs, who should attend and why, and then how to leverage the output to kind of jumpstart any efforts that you might have to do at your company. And then again, we'll leave some time for Q&A. So any solution or service that you're offering should address a challenge or a problem. In the case of M&A integration training, the problem is the integration challenge and how difficult doing this well is. Plenty of stats out there, as you can see in the three ovals from some reputable sources, of how difficult this is to deliver on expected value. This does not mean that these deals are failures. It just means that it failed to deliver on what was the planned objectives relative to value creation, market share, cost of capital, shareholder value, you name it. It is hard to deliver on objectives. And the reason why, if you go into some of the root cause issues, obviously flawed business logic is one. It's just a strategic miss. Your growth strategy is just can't keep up with your capabilities, or your due diligence is weak on the front end. You have a poor understanding of the target and how it fits with your business, making handicapping you from the get-go. Deal management is, rushed or poor negotiations, resulting in a kind of a bad marriage off the bat. And the last one is integration management, and this is the area where training can improve results. These are, the top 4 reasons cited for some of the poor returns that I mentioned on the earlier slide from studies in the industry, studies that we've done at Global PMI Partners. And the scope of today's discussion will focus on the last one, the flawed integration management. The M&A training that you typically see targeted to integration will not address your challenges on the first 3. Those are things that have to be addressed some other way. What we're going to talk about today is how to solve for the last one. Okay, so let's just set up the challenge and why it is important to prepare accordingly for any integration challenge. These are complex and intense corporate events. Just think about what's going on and what's in flux. People, technology, processes, customers, responsibilities for all the people, policies, the organizations being reset most times, facilities are being opened, closed, rationalized, operations, suppliers, synergies, change, business continuity, competition, everything is kind of in flux. Now, of course, it depends on the kind of integration. Sometimes some integrations aren't full integrations. Example would be a tuck-in. But for the kind of work that you would need training for, a merger or a significant acquisition where all of these are in play, you really need to look at something to get yourself up to speed. Because you have to transform all of these areas and at the same time maintain financial performance. You're relying on internal employees who are also doing other roles and have quote unquote day jobs. You want to avoid overwhelming and discouraging acquired employees. You need to keep them productive and on the ball. You have literally thousands of initiatives that have to be managed in a sequenced and orderly fashion if all of these items are in play, especially, and get everything done on time. There's usually important deadlines, conversion timeframes that tie to IT infrastructure requirements and whatnot. So all of this is going on, and if you had to do this, you wouldn't send people in unprepared. And so some of the things that, some of the challenge we have sometimes is giving people an appreciation for all that is happening during an integration event, and not only giving some people some training so they can prepare accordingly, but providing time enough to do so you can execute well. My advice here is to not underestimate the integration challenge if you're looking ahead to one. So with that said, just to recap so far, the problem we're trying to solve with training is the integration challenge that I've set up. So if you're convinced that you need it and are looking around and contemplating some training solutions for your company, I wanted to go through some objectives that you should hold forth as for integration training, and what you should endeavor to get out of it if you're going to spend the time doing it. So any good program will help you quantify the integration challenge and the work required to execute well. Not only planning disciplines, but the program management challenge and how to manage that in your organization to get all that work that I went through done well and on time. Recognize and apply fundamental concepts and best practices to manage the most typical integration planning and execution scenarios. What I've said many times is, no deal is the same. They share a lot of the similar characteristics in terms of what has to happen in the planning, time and effort involved, but everything is nuanced based on the type of transaction, the industry, size, the people involved. But what you want to do is give yourself a baseline of skills to handle the most common scenarios that are going to be shared across most any kind of significant acquisition or merger. Next, you want to understand the most typical planning and execution deliverables for an IMO, shorthand for the Integration Management Office. This is the central governance body for any integration. It is an accepted best practice. I can't imagine doing this without an IMO type construct to manage integration. It just works well and has proven itself over and over again to be the essential governance solution for integration work. And training should help you understand how it works, how to set it up, etc. Also, within the IMO, individual roles and responsibilities for the most common bodies like the steering committee, the IMO lead team, the functional leaders, those people that are heading up the HR work stream, the IT work stream, etc. What their response should be responsible for, so you can establish it and set expectations properly on the front end in terms of what these people should be doing and how. Obviously, understanding key deliverables and timing requirements related to integration planning and execution. Specifically, what should be done by when, and providing a baseline that you can use for setting up your planning and execution timetables, sequencing work streams properly so they're unfolding well, getting things done first. That should be priorities that inform other work and give people information that they can use to develop their work plans. That's all things that you'll cover in this kind of class. And then just understand what is required to create a robust and sustainable integration practice for an organization. So if you're somebody who's tasked with setting up an internal competency, growth, acquisitions are going to be a fundamental component of your growth strategy going forward. And you need to get good at this and not reinvent the wheel each time you do an acquisition. Training should provide a baseline for how to set up something where, just like any other process in your organization, it's a scalable and repeatable thing that you can do again and again with each acquisition across your organization. So let's get into primary types of integration training. And I didn't label these in terms of the way they're marketed, but it's more descriptive into the kinds that we do and that others in the industry do as well. The first is public, and this would be kind of a general session where you have attendees from different companies. You might have multiple instructors that cover the most common M&A integration topics. So you might have somebody that comes in if you're talking about communications planning. You might have another person coming in if they're talking about setting up the IMO and the fundamentals of an integration management office. The benefits for this, good idea sharing and learning from others. When I've done this in the group setting where you have people, you might have 20 people in a room and 15, 17 are for different companies, you get a lot of great conversations around what people have experienced, good opportunity for people to learn from others and share their experiences. You might have somebody in the room who's done 3 or 4. You might have somebody in the room who's been sent for the first time so they can learn because their company is just going to undertake their first one. Well, that's a great opportunity for that new person to hear a lot of anecdotes from not only the instructors, but also the other attendees on what's worked well and why. Also, it's a great chance for companies to send several employees who may be teaming on a pending acquisition so they can learn together and discuss and reinforce some of the concepts they're getting on the front end. Next is customized. And this is essentially doing the same thing in terms of content, but you're doing it on site, and it's a custom planning session with a company who is about to undertake a pending merger and acquisition. It typically involves senior executive level, so it's typically the lead team and maybe some key managers that report into the lead team. And then you can tailor the training topics around pending activity. So it gives you a chance to discuss, for example, the fundamentals of an IMO, but then part of your exercise would be, let's construct our IMO, who's going where, etc. And you're actually doing some of the work in the planning session, learning and doing. And it's a way to kickstart integration planning for pending acquisitions by getting some of that work done and getting your training done as well. What I've seen and the benefits of this when I've done these sessions is it really forces the senior team to solidify some thinking on key planning inputs. So for example, if you're in your training, if you're going through a section on establishing integration objectives and value drivers and why those are important to an integration. When you're doing this type of session, you're not only covering that, but also stubbing out the integration objectives, and you have a lot of great conversation on what those are. That the senior team, a lot of times, this is the first time they're getting into that little level of detail on integration planning, and it really serves you well in terms of kicking off the entire effort. The other thing is it really helps executives appreciate the amount of work involved. A lot of times, especially people that might be on an executive lead team that have not been involved in mergers and acquisitions, don't necessarily understand the amount of work involved. And why should we get this many people involved? Why do we need to start so early on the planning? Well, once you go through one of these sessions, by God, they get it, and they understand all the work involved, all the output that needs to be generated, how long it's going to take to plan and prepare for day one, and it really helps them get some religion on the amount of effort involved and the level of degree of difficulty. The other one is what I call specialized, and these are dedicated sessions on specific M&A disciplines. So some topics here might include just due diligence, IT, HR, managing carve-outs, divestitures, etc. So it's a deep dive on a narrow part of integration planning and execution. So I think these are great for people that are maybe functional experts and are trying to fine-tune their skills. Maybe they've already been involved in a few integrations. They're an HR person. They want to learn more about how to do their area better, and they get exposure to deep functional expertise. So this is a good way to fine-tune skills. And again, it's also good for idea sharing. So you can imagine if you're doing a session just on due diligence, you might have people in the room that are focused on this for companies. There's a lot of idea sharing as well on that area to learn from. Okay, next let's talk about criteria for selecting training. And primary objective here is to decide on the best option for you and your organization. So what I wanted to do is outline where I would start in terms of evaluating your options once you've decided that, yes, this is something that I think we need to do. First and foremost is relevance and applicability. You want to be active in the M&A space. Do you have pending activity coming up? Is it going to be, a full integration, or does your company buy companies and leave them alone, making integration less of a concern? So I think where you are in the space, what your company is doing, how acquisitions fit into your corporate strategy, and the timing for when that might occur is kind of first and foremost. Is it worth the effort based on that criteria? Next is instructor and company credentials. And what I encourage here is that you take a look at who you'll be learning from. Are these people that are active in the space? Are they doing more integration work than teaching? And what I liken this to is, any business school class that we ever took where the instructor had real world experience and was not that far removed from it seemed so much more interesting because they could share anecdotes and answer questions about real scenarios or outliers because they're out there doing it. And when I do learning in other areas where I'm trying to expand my skill set, that's always important to me. Is there more doing and less teaching? Because I want to learn about what's going out there in the real world. Next is just content, and any good option should detail what you're going to learn. Does it cover the areas that you're most interested in? If it's a general M&A, integration planning and execution course, for example, but you're really you need a deep dive on carve-out because that's all your company is planning to do. Well, you may be getting more than you need, and maybe that's a time to look for something that more specialized. So take a look at that, of course. And then last is just professional development. You may not be active in the space, or maybe your company has no plans to do it for a year, but you can use the time to expand your skill set. Some courses even offer CPE credits if your company does that, you can use it to just strengthen your own skills. And last but not least, and this kind of goes without saying and is obvious, but time commitment. And I only put this on here when I was putting this together because I've done sessions where busy executives inevitably are sent, but they really do not have the time to be there. They're in and out of the room on the phone, and it's almost, neither is getting done well. So you really got to set aside time to do it and be engaged, so you're getting the most out of it. You're learning from the colleagues that are in the room, and so it's obvious, but I wouldn't put it on here if I hadn't seen people struggle with that with this. So let me go through what I call the essential elements of planning and execution. So what I think, these are the topics that would be most helpful for anybody looking for a general planning and execution course that will cover the most common integration planning scenarios. So we talked a little bit about it at the front end of this, but you want to learn about defining the challenge, what you have to do from operational technology diligence, risk assessment and mitigation planning, external resource requirements, looking around and your own organization, understanding where you might have holes to fill when it comes to integration. An example there would be, I find a lot of companies are oversubscribed in IT, and there's very limited bandwidth. And when you get into an integration, if you have significant infrastructure planning, conversions, etc., that's a lot of work. And this is at the front end. You learn, how to diagnose that and understand, will we need some extra hands during the key work periods of the integration. And how do we understand that? How do we get it? What are our options? Because by the time you discover it in the middle of an integration that you're shorthanded, it's too late. Next would be establishing the strategic framework and understanding business goals, integration strategy, how to stub those out, and understand how to set up the strategic framework for your integration so all the planning work can flow logically from it, and everybody can draft off that construct that you've set. Understanding value drivers, key areas of the business being acquired, how to translate that into integration planning direction. And then conversion to integration planning direction. That it's all great to understand objectives, goals, strategy, value drivers, but then how do you turn that into so it shows up in the work? And any good course should show you how to do that, because that's something that you'll manage at the IMO level, how to get that all into the functional work plans in the planning phase. And then mobilizing integration governance, setting up the IMO governance structure, roles, responsibilities, how you work, the process between the bodies, ideal meeting sequencing and other, tactical elements of that to run a good process. All the roles and responsibilities. And this gets, when I do this, I get real specific about functional leads should be doing this. This is their, weekly deliverables. This is the expectation. This is the amount of time that you can expect to commit, and really lay that out so that when you go and start collecting those people that have been volunteered to be on the integration, they know exactly what they're getting into, and most importantly, their managers know exactly what they're getting into, so they're not pulled off and shortchange the effort. Also, internal resourcing guidelines can be really helpful. So, it's a XX billion-dollar acquisition. How many people do I need? It's a $200 million acquisition. How many people should I need? Just some guidelines on how staffing should be handled relative to the size or complexity of the deal. Next, so you get into what I call the sausage making part of integration, and that's the execution phase. And this is typically, focused on the more tactical elements regarding kind of mobilizing the effort. Obviously, a lot of time spent on preparing well for day one. How do you first extract all the day one mandatories, manage those, sequence them? What's the prep time needed? How do you manage that in the context of integration planning? Not just day one, but first 30, first 60, first 90. Setting that up, I like to set up the work in buckets like that. It helps people break down the work and understand it a little bit. If you have everybody try to throw out everything they think that needs to get done in the first 120 days, sometimes it's hard for them to understand the priority. If you break it out in smaller chunks, it gets a lot easier for them. Mobilizing the IMO process. Here, a lot of times you'll talk about how do you kick off an effort? What's the information that should be shared with the teams on the front end? How do you follow that up? How do you start your process and run a good one week to week? Any good integration effort should establish a weekly rhythm where you're having the same meetings, you're using the same output to inform work plan, or other work development. And that just becomes, you're rolling week to week, and people, it just becomes part of the process. That's a sign of a really good process if you're consistent week to week. And any good training should show you how to set that up. Obviously, tools and templates, things that you should be using for communication planning, functional work plan development, data harvesting, etc. Training should show you and make available to you some tools to use, so you understand how those fit into all the work that has to get done, but B, gives you a head start and to getting stuff done, so you're not reinventing the wheel and trying to create or think of something that you need. Hey, here's something that people use that I know that works, and I'm going to repurpose this for my own efforts here and save time and get this done. Okay, in terms of work plan development, training should cover phasing and prioritization for work. Specifically, how to set up a master integration calendar where you're sequencing the work. You're getting key elements, for example, on any IT infrastructure roadmap. I always like to start that as a baseline because it informs so much other work, what has to get done. So it should be an early deliverable that you can focus on and see, okay, what are key dates that we need to be ready by this date for this conversion. We're going to do application rationalization during this period, which will then kick out some learnings and output that the teams can use for this next phase of planning. How to sequence that and set it up, which can be a 12 to 18 month calendar at the end of the day, sometimes longer, especially if you have long tail IT work streams that might go out 2 even 3 years. Communications planning, just critical. How to set up what needs to be done, signing, close, and then obviously post close and onward. Key elements, key channels to use, examples of employee guides, resource guides, things that people use on day one to make sure that employee meetings are handled well, structured well, that you're saying the right thing at the right time, you're addressing the subjects that we know are most important at the front end, and gives you a lot of templates to use to get your work started. Also, unique scenarios. So if you're in the middle of a deal and you have a divestiture scenario, how do you manage and structure that in the context of integration planning so you can handle that? This a lot of times comes up if you have antitrust review going on along with your integration planning and you get notification that you might have to divest an asset. Well, how do you make sure that doesn't stop you cold and that you fold the planning for that into yours and understand what are some best practices to set up to manage carve-outs and divestitures. Last, it should show you how to build an internal competency. So if you are one of those companies that needs to get good at this, how do you do process optimization? So your integration planning and execution process is always learning it from itself as you go from acquisition to acquisition. You may be interested in setting up an integration playbook so people from different divisions or business units can leverage something that's consistent and scalable and has everything kind of laid out. So again, they're not reinventing the wheel. One thing I find when you go back to a company that may have done an integration a year ago, it's if they don't have something like a playbook or somebody managing the internal process, it really is like reinventing the wheel. It's hard to find any of the artifacts. People don't remember kind of the process and the sequence. People that were involved in it heavily have kind of spun off into the business. And, it's a shame because all that great work can't be leveraged. And so a playbook makes sure that the next guy, has something that they can tap to get them in business quickly. And then training, you might set up your own training, or do you have a solution for people that are going to be pulled into an IMO to get them up to speed quickly on a lot of these topics that we've discussed? So who should attend and why? Here's what I recommend, kind of in order of priority, people that benefit the most from training based on my experience. One are senior executives and business unit leadership teams. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes this is best served in that custom session that I talked about where you're learning and planning for your own event simultaneously. But again, the benefits for them here, understanding the level of effort required, the complexity, resourcing needs so they don't understaff the IMO right from the get-go. Formalize, solidify planning direction. You can get so much out of that kind of session that can jumpstart your integration planning where you've knocked out strategic objectives, business goals, synergy targets, and you have agreement at the executive level. So now you can start translating that into IMO planning direction. And then it also just reinforces the benefits of consistency. Once you go through a class like this, most senior executives understand why it's important to set up a process that's repeatable and scalable, so they're just more efficient the next time. Next is functional leaders and IMO team leads. By functional leaders, I mean those people that are going to be in charge of the IT work stream, in charge of the HR work stream. IMO team leads would be people that are going to be in the integration management office. So those people that are going to be leading the effort overall will have visibility into all the work. And the key things here are, in addition to everything that we've gone through today, but understanding specific challenges and deliverables for their areas. So what are the most common deliverables for an IT work stream, an HR work stream? Appreciation for their function's role in achieving the integration objectives. So, a lot of times people will optimize in their own lane immediately and just kind of worry about, for example, the HR stuff. When you do this kind of training where people are exposed to people from other functions, the kind of material and content that I've gone through, they have an appreciation for all the other work going on, and more importantly, how their work impacts and informs some of that other work and vice versa. Sometimes people don't appreciate those connection points. And then recognition of the work required in other work streams in addition to their own. So again, if you're very worried about my own HR work stream, I really don't know what goes on in IT, and I don't care so much, but this kind of training give you an idea of, wow, I better not load IT with any non-essential projects during the integration period, because I understand now how they're going to have their hands full. Corp dev executives get a lot out of this, I've found. And specific understanding of pre-planning requirements for the integration team. So what information they can pull, assuming post LOI and a deal is well on its way to being assigned, what can they start picking off that they know integration teams can use to start the pre-planning process? Understanding the linkage between corp dev and the integration teams. What I find sometimes is it's almost a real hard handoff between corp dev and integration team. And there's not a lot of communication going on during the process, and it kind of goes, hey, we're about to sign this in 2 weeks, here you go. When you could have backed up and maybe been involved more consistently earlier on to jumpstart your integration planning. And again, better understanding of due diligence information that is needed to help integration teams, and what is not needed. As anybody that's waded through a data room for a deal knows, there's a lot of great information there, and a lot of it you don't need for integration planning, is to get the deal done. But you don't want to turn people loose in there because it can be really confusing. So corp dev folks can help maybe separate the information they know that is important for integration planning, the stuff that primarily they just need. Last, M&A practitioners, external service providers, people that are, again, more professional development, trying to learn more, maybe get more expertise in a specific area. Those people benefit from training as well. One thing I wanted to add here too, sometimes sometimes IMO offices have admin support, people that have been assigned to help with all the meetings, scheduling, logistics, etc. Those are also good people to send, just so they understand the amount of work involved and the kind of meeting scheduling that's going on, and just to give them an appreciation for how this process works, that they'll be supporting. So leveraging the output from a training. So usually you have a ton of great information at your fingertips, not only your notes, but the stuff that was distributed during the training. And how do you make sure that just doesn't become shelfware when you go back and disappears into one of your drawers? Here's some ideas on how to use that I've seen work well. So all the topics and materials that you get, you can use that to structure planning sessions on your own. So if you, for example, the module on setting integration strategy and objectives, you can peel that off, have a session on setting the strategy and objectives for a particular deal, using that framework to guide the discussion and understanding what's the kind of output I want from that discussion. You can use those materials to do that. Tool templates, obviously, you can repurpose, create customized tool sets for your company's requirements. So, a functional work plan, for example, if you're not using a cloud-based tool, it's a Excel tool, but you want to add some things, maybe delete some things. At least you have a baseline to start with, to customize, which makes it so much easier to create the one that you think is best for your company. Next is some courses have case studies, kind of fictional deals that are used to reinforce some of the learning. This can be good reading for somebody that may have never been involved in a integration, just to understand kind of how they work. So before you get into all the detail, here's strategy, objectives, what does an integration planning and execution case study scenario look like in the first place? So it can be some good preliminary reading for somebody that's going to be involved in the work. Communication templates, again, help you make sure, give you something to start with. Make sure you don't miss any audience, that you're addressing the message points that are most critical at the right time, that you're leveraging channels, you're creating new channels if you need it. It'll just make sure that you don't miss anything if you leverage these with the people that are going to be involved in your communication work. Execution topics, so you can use kind of some of the sausage making output that I mentioned earlier to construct specific timetables for your activity. So based on what I learned in this hypothetical integration scenario, how do I want to stage mine relative to IT infrastructure? Maybe I have a TSA dynamic and timing that I need to layer on top of that. Those materials can help you make sure that you're staging and sequencing the work properly. Last is you can take all of this and leverage to create, if you're looking for a more comprehensive playbook solution for your company, at least you'll know the essential elements that you need to construct it and what should be there and how it's used. Okay, right on time. I wanted to make sure I left enough time for Q&A, and I'll turn it back over to Sheila to, if we have any questions and she can remind us how we'll get this done efficiently. So Sheila?
Great. So if you have any questions, you can submit them through the chat box, and you can either select everyone or panelists, depending on how private you wanted to keep the question. And you can also email questions to ops@gpmip.com. We did get a question over email, so I'll start with that one. The question is, what's the typical format of a training session?
Yeah, good question. So most of the ones that we do and that I'm aware of, and that others that do this as well, it's usually a 2-day session. Some are shorter, but there's a lot of content to get through on the planning and execution that we went through earlier. So it's typically a 2-day commitment, classroom setting, where you're working off content, but that you're having breakout, discussions around key topics, questions about, how has your company typically handled this? If you have some experienced people in the room, there are some that might combine topics and may take more days. But if you're just concentrating on M&A integration, the most typical one I've seen is 2 days.
Okay, another question we received is, do your classes use breakouts, for example, role playing or similar?
Yeah, I've seen that done couple ways. One is you stop and have a discussion around a particular topic, and then maybe if you have 20 people in the room, maybe you break out into 4 or 5 groups. People work that over and then kind of do a readout. So yes, yeah, that's very common.
Another question is, what kind of cloud-based tools would you recommend?
There's a lot of options out there. Obviously, my own policy is that I'm kind of tool and template agnostic, because I've learned that, people have different levels of comfort with technology. And the good news is that in the industry, there's lots of things out there. One that comes to mind is Medaxo has a cloud-based planning tool that's really good and covers the entire M&A life cycle, which I think is an important criteria. So if you're doing a lot of deals and you need something that can manage the process from the very front end, target identification and the work that Corp Dev's doing through integration planning, and you have a lot of activity going on, so you need to keep track of all, 5, 6 different deals. They're great tools like that, like Medaxo, that help you do that. And it's kind of a repository for all that activity and information, as you can imagine, that's going on, and to manage that well.
Okay, great. Another question we received is, what are the primary reasons to choose a customized versus a public session?
I think customized, if you're staring at an LOI and you're going to do something, and you have an opportunity to get the lead team together, to get them up to speed on how to do integration planning and execution, but also to jumpstart your integration planning and literally serve as your first official planning session. I think that's the reason to choose, and people are available, of course, to choose custom, is if you have the opportunity to use it to really start the planning for a pending deal.
Okay, great. What's most important when choosing options?
Back to the what I went through. I think it's a combination of, are you active, and do you have pending activity, and does your organization need and people need to learn more about this to do this well? I think first and foremost, that relevance and applicability criteria is first and foremost, and then you can look at your options that are available in terms of where to get training, and evaluate some of the other things like instructors and credentials and content. But do you need it, first of all? And are your people needing the training and experience and exposure to planning and execution essentials to make sure that they're prepared?
Okay, great. We've got one more. Where else can one learn about integration?
That's a great question. There's a lot of great groups on LinkedIn. If you go in and just type in some of the keywords, that have discussions, people will post things. M&A integration management. I can't think of all their names now, but there's 4 or 5, I think, maybe 2 or 3 primary ones, and then some other that would be good to join to learn about that information. Companies that are active in the space, like ours, for example, we have distribution lists where we're sending content out. Webinars like this are a great opportunity to learn. Other people do them. There's a lot of information available just if you do searching on integration management, white papers, and things that you can leverage. It doesn't replace training, but at least if you're starting fresh and really don't know much about it at all, give you a good baseline of information on exactly what's involved with your typical integration.
Okay, good. Well, if anyone has other questions, you can submit them through the chat box, or you can continue to email them.
So Sheila, remind folks again how they can get this information if they want it.
Sure. So after this webinar, we're going to go ahead and post the video of this webinar on our website. We'll also post a link to this presentation that you're seeing right now. And all of you that are registered for this webinar will receive an email with the link to that. So you can look for that later on today. And then I also wanted to share some upcoming events. One of them is about our book. I think there's a slide on that. We just released a book in April, The Cross-Border Mergers and Acquisitions. It's available on Amazon right now, and it's a practical guide to M&A in today's diverse economy. And Scott Whitaker, that's gone over this webinar, has brought together 10 experts from 9 different countries. And so you can learn more about this on our website at gpmip.com/cross-border-M&A book.
I would also,
go ahead.
Yeah, anyone that might be interested in Brexit implications too. We had a great webinar yesterday, and Sheila, if you, some of you,
we've got that link on our webinar on our website as well about the Brexit webinar we had yesterday. So that was a great one.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to plug it. There's some good information there, and encourage you if you weren't able to attend to check that out. I had one question.
Events we've got going on, and the next slide is an online mastermind, which is an M&A integration for executives. This begins on Thursday, July 28th, and it's an 8-week-long video-based training course. And then in October, we have a 2-day training, M&A integration planning for executives, October 24th to 25th in San Francisco. And this is a course and workshop designed for management teams leading the transition from deal execution to operationalization. And I think with that, thank you again, all of you, for calling in. You'll be receiving a link soon with the webinar and the presentation. And you can continue to email questions at ops@gpmip.com, and I'll get those to Scott so he can get back to you. So thank you again, all.
Thanks very much, everybody, for your time this morning. Have a great week and a great holiday weekend.
Thank you.